Welcome back, Dean Smith, who was with us last month. And as we mentioned last month, Dean's been a modeler for some 40 years. I mean, for most of his life. And during the last 40 years, he's been modeling the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Vida Division Railroad. Well, this is based on the prototype and highlights numerous prototypical scenes. Dean has a bit of a whimsical side to him, so his love for fantasy makes him incapable, as he says, of taking anything too seriously. So with that, let me introduce Dean, and he hails from Rolla, Missouri. Dean, over to you.
All right, thanks, Pete. I'm seeing if I can't share my screen here.
Okay, we see it coming up. Good.
There we go. Okay. All right, well, thank you, everybody. To set the stage for this presentation, like Pete mentioned, I have a strong interest in both history and fantasy. And to me, a good fantasy develops a believable, complex history of its own. That's one reason why I love the Lord of the Rings so much, and actually years ago seriously considered modeling the misty mountain lines of the Middle Earth Railway. But I decided to model a prototype instead, and I began my search looking through old model railroad magazines for inspiration. And I came across a Railroad You Can Model article on the East Tennessee and Western North Carolina Railroad by Jim Kelly in the July 1981 issue. And by the time I finished this article, I knew it. I'd found my prototype. I was that excited. Well, I wanted to reflect this eureka moment as part of the mythos of my Vida Division Railroad. And so with the help of my profoundly talented daughter, Becky, we created an old photo scrapbook of a rail fan expedition from 1925 that I found in much the same way I discovered the article in MR. And this find became the inspiration for my layout. Now, like Pete said, I certainly do have a whimsical side, but it was important to me. I wanted the Vida Division to feel like a real railroad with its own traditions, legends, and history. So with that in mind, sit back, shrink to HO scale, and join me in a rail fan trip on the 1925 ET&NC Vida Division Railroad. So here you can see, this is the scrapbook that I came across at a flea market. And then opening the first page, you can see why how this gentleman found out about the ET. The ET really pushed excursions through its entire operation, and you can see there they want you to spend a day of wholesome pleasuring in the land of the sky. They also really pushed a lot on having Kodaking in the mountains. They also had pamphlets like that. So we know that this is how he found out about his the trip. And here we've got our first entry: 66 miles of sheer mountainous beauty. I'm so excited to finally ride the Blue Ridge Stemwinder and do some Kodaking. Doe River Gorge, here I come. And you can see here where he snipped out the map from one of those pamphlets, which shows that the ET was a 66-mile short line narrow gauge railroad, ran from Johnson City, Tennessee through Boone, North Carolina, and of course traveled through the picturesque, beautiful Doe River Gorge, which is the most primitive gorge in the eastern United States. And from there, you can see this is the map of the Vida Division Railroad, and it's a pretty much straightforward point-to-point layout. The towns, the yards, they were designed to enhance the operation on the Vida Division. And Cranberry is the only track plan that reflects the actual prototype, because I wanted to make sure that the railroad would be fun to operate. And we can keep usually about 10 people busy, and an operating session usually lasts about 2.5 hours. And the railroad is in about 24 by 28 feet. Well, here we're at ground zero. This is where all these excursion trips would start. And those are pictures of the Johnson City Depot. I don't know why this gentleman chose to put two photographs of the same scene, but we're going to see that many, many times in this scrapbook. He seemed to want to take two pictures of the same scene. And there's some color pictures of the depot. The depot still exists. In fact, recently it was rebuilt to appear just like it did back in the heyday of the railroad. It's now the Yeehaw Brewery. And if you're ever in Johnson City, Tennessee, you want to definitely check that out. My model is scratch built using pretty much styrene and modified windows. There you can see down at the bottom where they're starting to load into the excursion for the day. And here's some pictures of an excursion train crossing the Doe River. So looks like we're on our way. There's some color pictures of the same scene. Crossing the Doe River, headed into Tunnel 1 on his way to Hampton. But now, wait a minute, our gentleman, he wasn't on that excursion train. Apparently, he got to meet Mr. Hobbs at the yard office. Well, that would be Clarence Hobbs, who was the longtime superintendent of the railroad. In fact, the ET was one of the very last railroads to get rid of steam locomotives. They ran steam until Mr. Hobbs' death, actually, in the mid 1960s. But here we're meeting him at the yard office. And there we can see, we don't know if that gentleman there might be our rail fan, or it could be he's looking at a blue book, which would be one of the rule books of the railroad. So he may be like someone hoping to get a job with the railroad. But anyway, you can't get any higher up by talking with Mr. Hobbs. And my heavens, we got to go inside the dispatcher's office. I mean, we're going to get a tour of the railroad on this trip. And there's some pictures from the scrapbook. And that's my son, Stephen, who's working as a dispatcher the day on an operating session. And you can see there in the dispatcher's office, you can see the phone system that my friend Bob Woodley designed and I built. And also the window. Well, the window is a flat screen TV. And you see there in the yard office where that little camera there. So the view of the dispatcher, the big guy dispatcher, during an operating session is exactly the same view out the window that the HO scale dispatcher would have when he's sitting at his desk in the yard office. And look, I mean, got some gifts from the dispatcher. How special is that? The Vita division, we have a full rule book, contains rules of the railroad, a map, descriptions, a timetable. It's based on a book similar to that Paul Scholes, the late great Paul Scholes, developed. And then there's the train order from the trip. Engine 5 run extra mixed to Boone in return. The Vita division uses an exact replica of the actual train orders that the prototype used. We can see now, we know the date, September 3rd, 1925. And just like the prototype, the Vita division, all freight trains are run as extras, while passenger trains are run by a timetable. And there we see that he also was gifted a couple of timetables, again from 1925, which have, you know, the times and stops on all the passenger trains. Well, look at that. Mr. Hobbs invited us to go on a mixed train and wasn't leaving for a few hours, so he invited us to explore Johnson City. So we're going to have time to actually look at Johnson City. And there's some pictures of the very distinctive 3-stall engine house. And I tell you what, that is one nifty maintenance crane. And trust me, that maintenance crane gets used quite a bit on the Vita division when we have mishaps. There's some color versions of it. The engine house was built by my friend Les Walker, and I ended up putting an interior into it. And the maintenance crane was built by my good friend Brad Sloan, who ended up entering it and winning first place at a national NMRA convention with it, and then turned around and gifted it to me. So, I mean, he'd be a good friend anyway, but yeah, that was a very special gift from him. We met Andy Kern at the Sand House and had a great time. Andy was a long-term time employee of the railroad, over 50 years, and he was responsible for most of that time in the care of the locomotives. And there you can see, again, a shout out to Jimmy Simmons. I did use the Monster Model Works brickwork, and you can see there that he was telling the truth in his presentation, because ended up, I think, working really good job on that model. The water column is based on a photograph, so it's prototypic. No, we could never find out how ashes were taken care of the railroad. We still have not been able to find that out. So I just built, you know, a typical ash pit there to service the locomotives and add some visual interest and also some operation interest. We saw them transferring coal from standard gauge to narrow gauge hoppers. Through most of its history, the ET was a dual gauge railroad between Johnson City and Elizabethton. And this transfer trestle is how they transferred coal and liquid fuel products from the standard gauge to the narrow gauge cars. And there you can see where the standard gauge hoppers are up, are spotted up top, and then there's that tipple that they're then transferred, the materials transferred down into the narrow gauge hoppers. And there's some pictures from the Vida division. That's a scratch build structure, some titchy detail parts on the tipple. And we also have photographs of them coaling the locomotives at the transfer trestle as well, although there was another place to do that called coal chute. I wasn't able to model coal chute, so one of the jobs the hostler at Johnson City has during op sessions is to bring the locomotives down to the transfer trestle so they can get fueled up for their trip. Downtown Johnson, this is where my whimsical side comes in a little bit more. These buildings are, they look typical for 1925, but you can see there, like my good friend Oscar from New York City came to visit. My son and I are home brewers, and our brewery is called Braitman's Best Brewing Company. And of course, I model 1925, which is Prohibition. So you see where they kind of tried to paint out the whitewash over the word brewing. I'm sure those two gentlemen there are imbibing in nothing stronger than maybe cheer wine or root beer. Next to the Johnson City Chronicle, the Vida division boasts two newspapers, the Johnson City Chronicle and the Watauga Democrat. And that's one of the ways I, again, try to build a history for my railroad, because big happenings on the railroad end up getting written up by in the newspapers. And those are my three favorite journalists. The young woman on the left is my daughter Becky, and the young woman using the wheelchair is my friend Maddie, who writes for Vogue. And then that's Chris Ford, who is the longtime president of the ET Historical Society and also a good friend. Those buildings down at the bottom, those are DPM kits, and Rose Hotel and Marcy's Mercantile. They're named after my granddaughters. So the way I try to look at the Vida division is it's more of a based on a true story as opposed to a documentary. So I mean, I consider it an ET and WNC railroad. I've got a lot of prototype scenes, but also a little bit of room for some more personalized touches. The iron furnace, the reason the railroad was built in the first place was to haul iron from Cranberry, North Carolina to the furnace in Johnson City. So there's some photographs of a very large facility. I had a problem though, I really didn't have room for it. So that the model there on the left, that's a beautiful S-scale model that some of you might recognize. It was on John and Sharon Waite's layout in Jefferson City, Missouri for many years. When we lost John a few years ago, Sharon donated that to the George L. Carter Museum at East Tennessee State University, where it's still well cared for and well displayed. So what I did was I took a photograph of it, that's from the layout itself, and then sized the photograph and then mounted that photograph on the backdrop itself. You can see how it's like a little hill going up to it, and the cars disappear around that hill, so you can't see that it runs right into the backdrop. And it worked real well. I originally experimented with using colorized photos of the prototype, but I found that the picture of the model, since everything else is a model, actually seems to fit in better, and it worked out well, I think. A side-by-side look at the different gauges, and they switch the standard gauge cars with narrow gauge engines. I love this photograph because it really does show the difference in sizes between the standard and the narrow gauge. And unique to my knowledge, I don't know of no other railroad that does it. ET for years used their narrow gauge engines to switch standard gauge cars, and also to haul standard gauge cars from Johnson City, the 12 miles to Elizabethton. And the way they did it is a very unique little swivel coupler that was on the locomotives. It was it'd swing in three directions, and straight they use, of course, for the narrow gauge, and then they could swing it to the left or the right to line them up and to haul the standard gauge cars. So that's just a really neat little detail of the railroad. They didn't call them standard gauge, I tell you that. The locals all referred to these things as the broad gauge. So the broad gauge locomotives, here's two Southern engines ready for action at Johnson City. The ET interchanged with both the Southern and the Clinchfield. And here's some photographs of switching the standard gauge on the Vida division. I was not able to figure out how to make a working three-way swivel coupler in HO scale. So my answer was I mount 714 Cadies at narrow gauge height on all of my standard gauge cars. And there's enough play there. It works really, really well. We've got hours of operation on the railroad now of switching with the narrow gauge cars, and it works out really well. I got to see them loading a trailer onto a flat car. Well, the ET was also a trucking company as well as a busing company. And so they had their own fleet of trucks. And there you can see down there on the lower right, loading a passenger car, a truck trailer onto a homemade, in the shops built car. And what a novel idea. When these were built, this was a novel idea, putting a truck trailer on a flat car. What will they think of next? If the ET wasn't the first railroad to have TOFC cars, it was certainly one of the very first. And again, they were built in their shops. The reason they built them was because Tennessee and North Carolina had different allowable weight limits for a few years. So they would load the trailers in Johnson City to North Carolina's weights, haul them over the railroad to Boone, unload them at Boone, and then off they go. Within just a year and a half, Tennessee ended up raising its allowable rates, and these cars just disappeared. But fortunately, at least there's still one of them that finds some business on the Vida division. Cy Crumley, another pretty much considered the face of the ET, was a many year employee and was a true gentleman. And you can see him here. He's posing by the Combine 15 car, which is a very unique passenger car. It's 1/3 passenger, 1/3 freight, and our baggage, and 1/3 railroad post office. So there's Cy posing for a picture. And also you can see allowed our rail fan to take pictures of his freight conductor's train book, so we can keep track of the cars that were moved on this mixed train. And that is an exact photocopy of the real document that the ET used in the 1920s. So on the Vida division, if you're running a freight train, you're using exactly the same document to record your freight movements that the prototype guys did in the 20s. Met fellow photographer Bob Richardson, who offered to swap photos with me. Bob was a well-known photographer in the area, and boy, being able to swap photographs with him was, I'm sure, quite an honor. And here we are making up the mixed train. You can see some folks are getting loaded, are getting into the Combine 15, which we'll be using on the mixed train, and just see the engine there gathering up cars according to the switch list. And here we are leaving Johnson City, across that interesting bridge there, which we'll get to in just a minute, over the Doe River, headed into Tunnel 1 and ready to head to Hampton. Now, no conversation on the ET would be complete without a little bit of discussion on the Great Wreck of 19. The locals still talk about this day. There was a new yardmaster working in Johnson City. He was new to the area, and he was not aware that the standard gauge rail ended at the yard limit and did not continue onto the bridge. So he inadvertently took a string of standard gauge cars onto the bridge, and it's you can see there in the newspaper photograph the calamity that ensued. Well, of course, Mr. McKenzie was immediately his employment was terminated for this grievous act. However, he appealed because and then Sherman Pippin, a long-term engineer of the railroad and also the proud union rep for many years, went to bat for him and countered that believe it or not, the management, there was no sign at the yard limit explaining that the standard gauge track ended at that point. To make a long story short, the railroad management ended up taking full responsibility. Mr. McKenzie was reinstated, full pay, back pay, full seniority, and fortunately no one was hurt. And the only lasting result is that from now on forever, he will be known as Short Rail McKenzie on the ET. So there's the color picture of the accident. Every time I give a clinic on the railroad, I get asked about this bridge. So Pete asked me to include this slide here. The covered deck bridge over the Doe River, it was a wooden covered deck truss bridge. It was built in 1881. There you can see pictures of it before it was sited. It weathered poorly, and by 1891, it was to the point where it had to be rebuilt. So they rebuilt it in 1891, and they decided to cover it with tongue and groove siding, pine tongue and groove siding. And while it kind of looks a little bit like a barn wedged over the Doe River, it served the railroad well for until its abandonment in 1950. So that's the story behind that bridge. Well, now we're headed into Hampton, milepost 14. You can see there from the train book that we're dropping off boxcar 409 and we'll be picking up boxcar 406. And there's a couple pictures there of the depot, which is my version of it's just a standard scratch built wood building, busy in both places. Had a little bit of time while they were switching, and at the standard gas station, our gentleman met Marvin Mabel and his daughter Frances. Frances insisted on introducing me to all of her cats, and there must be dozens. What a wonderful family. That photograph, actually, that's a gas station that my grandfather built, and it happens to be in Independence, Missouri, not in Hampton, Tennessee. But that little L shape around the gas station, my mom grew up in that station, and my model of it is based on photographs and long discussions with her about her life growing up there with grandma and grandpa. And that's another reason why the Vida division is what it is. I mean, it makes sense that it would be at Hampton. It looks like it fits at Hampton. It certainly was not on the ET, but it ended up, for obvious reasons, ended up being on the Vida division. And yeah, my mom raised 9 kids, was a great mom, and also was known as a crazy cat lady. So here's some pictures of switching Hampton, the sawmill there in the upper left. That's one of the Fine Scale Miniatures' very first kits. I rubbed my daddy's back for like an hour and a half to convince him to take me to the hobby shop because I bought that before I could drive. So, but you've got some pictures there of Hampton. There you can see there's the gas station. That's my mom and my Aunt Alma swinging in the back. And then you can barely see my grandma hanging clothes. And then that's my grandpa talking to a customer there by the pumps. So again, some pictures of what the switching's going on. The crew arranged a photo run by through the covered bridge at Hampton just for me. What a great bunch of fellas. Well, they were, and I don't know. So look what I mean, they were able to let this gentleman get out and do a run by through the other covered bridge. You can see it there. That's actually a BTS kit. And that's more what you would think of as a covered bridge. It also served the railroad until the end. And so a little more standard what you think it is. And then you can see the train there heading into Tunnel 2, which is going to be getting us into the Doe River Gorge. And finally, the Doe River Gorge. Bob Richardson kindly shared these photos with me as we headed into the Doe River Gorge. You can see they're coming through Tunnel 2. And there on the right, it's up and looks like, is that a face or is it just leaves? Well, you can see there, you were not really sure what that may be, but then again, we can't go back, so I guess we'll never know. And here's some pictures in the gorge. Hundreds of trees, I modeled in the east. The trees are primarily, they're puffballs that then fade into and are worked into super trees. And I use the super leaf as opposed to the ground foam. But you can see the gentleman there on top of the mountain. I'm not sure who he is, but he did promise he would never say, "You shall not pass" when the train goes by. So he never has, and I let him stay. The rock work is Bragdon geodesic foam. Once I got used to it, I really liked that material. So that's all the rocks in the gorge are the Bragdon materials. Some action in the gorge. What Blue Ridge Mountain would be complete without a still? So there in the middle, you can see the little still scene. That's a metal Woodland Scenics kit that I think I bought when I was 16 and built when I was 60. And waterfall is the runoff from the spring that cools the still. Down there in the bottom, those little people there, they look almost like they're half size. And if you look carefully at them, you'll see that they're barefoot and they have furry feet. And the one is like almost naked, hanging upside down. And if you listen real carefully, you might hear him complain a little bit about the fact that the guy there by the fire is burning his precious fishes. Over on the upper left, this is a true story, at least most of it. The very first time that John Waite and Brandon, his son Brandon, and I hiked in the Doe River Gorge, we were blatantly trespassing. This was in the mid 80s. It was before the Christian camp bought it. And so we just did it. And it was kind of a misty rain most of the day. And we were almost done. And we were walking along. The rain had just quit a few minutes before. We saw the coolest looking cowboy hat I've ever seen in my life hanging in a tree. It was this beautiful hat. It had a taxidermied rattlesnake around it with the fangs up like it was going to strike, and then with a rattle out the side. Oh, and Brandon wanted that hat so bad. And you can see, I mean, literally, I stopped him from getting it. And I very quietly said, boys, we need to get out of here now, because the rain had stopped less than 10 minutes before, and that hat was bone dry. So the fiction of it, if you're down below, the gentleman, probably one of the moonshiners with the rifle and happens to have a banjo by his tree, that we don't know for sure, but we didn't give anybody a chance to find out. So, and finally, Kodaking at Party Point. You see there are a couple photographs. There were these excursion trains would stop in the middle of the gorge and let people out just to share in the absolute beauty of the area. And it was breathtaking. There's some photographs of it. We every year during our convention, we're able to go up past Party Point to actually one of the first bridge with a train. And this year, hopefully, we're going to be behind steam. So keep your fingers crossed. And if you're ever around this area, it's a trip you might want to see if you can't take. And there's some pictures that'll make some of you Colorado guys feel a little bit more at home. I included those to show I do have hundreds of trees on the Vita division, but I also have hundreds and hundreds of trees to go. So they're not quite done, but I figured that'd make you Colorado guys feel a little better. And then, of course, there's a color picture of the Kodaking. Finally got to see the tunnel bridge. It's a very iconic part of the railroad. Within just a couple hundred yards, the Doe River made a very sharp U-turn, and the railroad crossed the river on a deck truss bridge, went through a tunnel, and then crossed the bridge immediately, or crossed the river immediately on a through truss bridge. And here's some photographs of looking at from both ends of the tunnel there. And there's the other side of that bridge. And there's some color pictures of it. The bridges are built from Central Valley. There's kit bash from Central Valley parks. So that's the one on the left. That's one of my favorite photographs of the rail. I love that scene. And since I've been getting sound in more of my locomotives, George Pearson out of Chicago, a good friend of mine, is helping putting sound in my locomotives, and having a train with sound roaring through that tunnel over that bridge, it still gives me goosebumps. And now we're getting into where the reason railroad existed. We're now pulling into Cranberry, North Carolina, milepost 34. See again from the train book the work that has to be done. That water tank that's on the upper level, that's a 3D print from Ben Merritt, who's a good friend of mine. He's a undergraduate at ETSU, and he is doing some beautiful stuff in 3D. And that model there, it's just two parts. It's the water tank and the spout. And I added some extra detail to it, but they turned out really, really nice. So if anybody's interested in modeling the ET or interested in some really cool 3D stuff, you need to look up his website. Again, it's Merritt 3D. He's also a really great guy. The depot and the general store, they served the population of Cranberry for decades. You see there's a picture of the depot and then the general store. And our rail fan had a yummy egg salad sandwich with a nice juicy pickle at the Cranberry general store, and washed it down with a cheer wine with a moon pie for dessert. Delicious. Cheer wine is it's a soda that's local to the area. It's a little bit of an acquired taste. I think everybody knows what moon pie is, but they also originated in that area. So we had time for lunch. And what was that you say? I've left my hearing at the Cranberry Iron Mine. The noise of the concentrator was deafening. There you can see that's the iconic picture of the mine there. And you can see from the Vita division, I don't have all of my structures complete yet, although everything is at least mocked up to that level. I'm hoping by 1925 or 2025 to have all the structures and everything done in time for the National Narrow Gauge Convention that's going to be in St. Louis, and hopefully some people can come and visit. that building in the middle that looks something like Dr. Seuss might have created to put on Mulberry Street was the concentrator, and ore was brought out of the mine and ore cars and dumped into the concentrator, which was this huge magnetized drum that would just crush the rock into pea size. And then the tailings, of course, would fall onto a conveyor and then be routed to one tipple. And then an arm would come up and scrape the iron off of the side of the drum onto another conveyor to another tipple. So that's how, you know, and the same with my model. I do have a sound unit for it, but I don't have it turned up quite as loud as it probably really was. They also had surface mining in Cranberry, and believe me, that had to be hard work. That was just hard scrabble, pick, shovel, and then pushing it off that platform, and then hand shoveling it in a hopper car. So, and now the next picture, that's there, Mr. Crumley and his daughter Ruth posed for me beside the passenger car shed, and I promised I would mail them a copy of the photo of them. And so they can see the next picture. There's it actually happening. There's our rail fan taking that picture. Now that ended. I mean, as soon as he was done. And yet again, the historian inside me, that photograph, you know, preserve that image, you know, forever. So that's the importance of why we need to take pictures of things. The other side, you can see there is a photograph of the passenger car shed, and also up above on the upper level, some of the surface mining. Like the prototype, Cranberry is a 2-level. There's an upper level, and then the lower level is reached by a switchback, and which is just the way the real railroad was. And there's some pictures of switching Cranberry. This would be a good time to mention my backdrops. The backdrops, that's the only scenery element that I did not do myself. And those were painted by my good friend Sharon Waite. And I just love her impressionistic method, where it gives you a feel that, you know, things are going beyond, but it's nothing to look at, so it doesn't distract from the models. I really kind of Tom Sawyered her into doing that. She kept coming over, and I kept fooling her into thinking she was going to teach me how to do it. But by the time we got done, she painted the whole layout for me, and I'm very proud to have a Sharon Waite original. A few more pictures of Cranberry. Again, there's the mine and Ben's water tank. And then that's the turntable. That's a diamond scale, a model that works pretty well. It's a little tricky to build, but it works. I mean, it works pretty well, actually. Cranberry Depot and the general store, those are both Carolina Craftsman kits, which nice kits, just really good to work with, and did very prototypic and easy to build. So always glad to be able to buy a kit for something that I need. And that's that little coal shed there is scratch built with a few the roofing material I got from a Carolina Craftsman kit, but that's a scratch built building. And again, just, it was hard work. I mean, the coal was hand shoveled out and hand shoveled back, and I think that I'm pleased with the way that little model turned out. Now, obviously, I haven't built the pump house yet, but that will eventually be pumping water from Cranberry Creek up to use for use in the mine. And then on the right, that brand new looking fill there, in 1914, the ET bought the Linville River Railway and immediately started upgrading the tracks so it would be suitable for the heavier locomotives. So that is actually what they did, was they filled all the trestles with tailings from the mine, and that one obviously is complete. But then here, Linville trestle was spectacular. It's a shame it will soon be nothing but a fill. And there's a couple photographs of one of the trestles being filled, one with the side dump cars, the other on the Vida division. One of the jobs of the Cranberry yardmaster during an operating session is to take a couple of carloads of tailings out to the trestle and fill them in. Now, here's some color pictures of it. You can see where I've got the culvert in the process of being filled. There are hundreds of nut bolt washer castings in this thing. So you trust me, this time, this is, in reality, this is frozen in time. This trestle will never really be filled, but it's kind of fun for me to feel like I captured it in the middle of the history being built. Now we're into Linville, North Carolina, milepost 46. Linville catered to the wealthy. It was in the shadow of Grandfather Mountain, and a lot of rich people would come up there for to escape the heat of the summer. Again, we can see the switching that was done there. And the station manager at Linville was taken enough by a rail fan that he gave him a photo of the handcar shed under construction. And then here we got Jim, the head mechanic, and his dog Diamond repairing a hand car. And apparently that other fellow sitting there just spends his time yakking and saying he's drinking coffee, although of course, you know, we're not that far from the still. We really don't know what was in that cup. And there's some color pictures. The depot was covered by chestnut bark, and it's now been restored. It was spent decades as just a house, and it's now been moved to the museum in Newland, North Carolina, and it's been restored with the 505, the Blues 505 on the track next to it. So again, if you're ever in that area, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful scene. And that model is for a Webster Classics model from Les Walker. And then there you can see the Jim and Diamond. My next door neighbor built a auto repair shop next to me, 30 years ago. And I went in and introduced myself. He'd been open about a week. And I said, you know, it's going to be a quarter of a century from now, but someday I'm going to be one of those guys. And at least a couple of times a month, I try to get over there, and I'm one of those guys drinking coffee and trying not to get too much in the way. Diamond would love me anyway, I think, but I always make sure I've got a couple of his favorite treats. So Diamond and I are good buddies, and they're on the Vita division. And there's some more pictures of switching at Linville. That the Woodley trestle, Woodley coal there is actually that's another Woodland Scenics, one of those metal kits I bought in my teens and built in my 60s. The track work at Linville is a time saver switching puzzle, as you know, made famous by John Allen. I've thought years of replacing it because it's obviously not prototypic, but my crews enjoy it, and it adds a lot of fun twists to operating sessions, so it's going to stay. Now we're getting into a little bit of pastoral scenes. It's always nice to be able to relax just a little bit, enjoy the scenery. So we're leaving Linville and going through a little farm scene. And first, of course, though, we're going to get a cow in the way. I have no idea how many poor cows ended up getting stuck on the tracks on the ET. Usually, I think they happen during excursion trips, and I'm sure that every time it was just an accident. But every once in a while on the Vita division, we also have a cow that we have to move. We pass this picturesque mountain farm along the right-of-way. The Vita division has it all. Well, we try. And that the very first model railroad book I ever bought is called Easy to Build Model Railroad Structures. And I was a kid, and I saw that, it was 1959 copyright. And I saw that picture, I just absolutely fell in love with it. And I said, someday, I'm going to build that scene. And there you can see again, the structures are only mocked up. There you can see the version of that on the Vita division. Now be very afraid. Those chickens up there, I bought those from Alan Pollock, and they're the most caffeinated little chickens when you turn them on. And everything else I've done, I have to admit that that's like the #1 draw. People are, can you make the chickens? Can you make the chickens? But anyway, so they're chickens. And if you look carefully at that cow down below, you'll notice that she's missing her right front leg. And I noticed that one day, and I asked Farmer Jones, he's up there with the chickens, and I said, Farmer Jones, what about that cow? And he said, oh, that's Harriet. We love Harriet. Harriet's like one of the family. She's our favorite cow. And I said, well, what about her missing leg? Now, here's the dad joke. He said, he says, good cow like that can't eat her all at once. So anyway, if you look at the barn, you also see there 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And that, if those of you who might remember Animal Farm by George Orwell, those are the 7 commandments of animalism. So there is a rumor afoot that the animals may be rising up with justice for Harriet. So just in case, we better be very careful. Now, leaving that foolishness behind, we're now steaming into Shoals Mills, North Carolina, milepost 58. It was a home of a huge lumber, the Boone Fork Lumber Company sawmill. There you can see pictures of the facility there. And there's some pictures of my model of it. It's a completely board by board construction, the entire thing. In both the lower level and the upper level are completely detailed. Use a lot of Keystone Locomotive Works detailed parts for that. And also there's sound. It's a nice scene, and of course it's an important customer for the railroad. And there we've got some pictures switching Shoals Mills, that more spindly trestle in the back. That's part of the Boone Fork Lumber Company, where they'll bring logs out of the woods and to push down into the log pond. So just got some pictures there. And And there we are leaving Shoals Mills, and I don't have this water in it yet. You can see the splash dam there on the right, and there's also sound there. And now we're pulling into Boone, North Carolina, milepost 66. It's the end of the line. You can see all those little check marks there, and it says under the comments, the remarks mixed Combine 5 rail fans as guests. So there our fella got into the writing, and every single one of these in the prototype of the example we have, the conductor would write "okay" at the bottom. So we do that. So we're done with the train trip this direction anyway. And there's a couple pictures of the depot. Obviously, it's a little busier in the Vida division than the other one. Progress comes to the Blue Ridge. The number of cars, buses, and trucks is growing by leaps and bounds. Electric lights. I hope that all these newfangled vehicles don't cause a problem for the railroad. Well, this gentleman was probably looking into his crystal ball, because 14 years after that photograph was taken was the end of railroading in the Boone area forever. There's never been a train back. So I guess he saw it coming. Purchased some postcards of the new administration building at Appalachian State Normal School. Be sure to give one to my daughter Becky, so then we'll hint of who this gentleman is. Perhaps she'll be a proud mountaineer someday. I'm building that structure right now. I'm kit bashing it out of 4 old AHM apartment building kits, so it ought to be done in the next couple of weeks. And there's a few pictures of the fuel depot. If you tuned in last month, I talked about how I built this, and it's a combination of kit bashed and scratch built elements. No pictures anywhere of Harbin store, so I just picked a Carolina Craftsman kit that I thought would make sense, and included that for Harbin store. There was a very fancy student living facility in Newland, at Appalachian State, called Newland Hall. But rather than building that, I found this laser art kit that I really liked, and it looked very similar and adds a little splash of color. And I named that Anderson Hall after my good friend Ken Anderson. And then you'll notice there, like those 3 young people at the picnic table. That's Jason, Boomer, and Red Eye. They're 3 dear friends of mine that I met when we all through hiked the Appalachian Trail a few years ago. And Jason and Boomer are proud graduates at App State. So and Maple there, that's Jason's dog. And I promised them, somewhere in southern Maine, that someday you guys will be on the Vida division. So there they are, and you can see that rascally Maple there is in the process of eating Jason's homework. And if you look behind them in the shadows, you can almost see, I think that young man's name is Luke, and he may be having a disagreement with his father. I'm not sure what it's about. Maybe something about, I don't know, his destiny. But anyway, moving on. The depot is scratch built. My friend Chris Jesse put a kit out years ago, but I couldn't get available the kit, but he was kind enough to give me all the instructions and everything. So that's just a pretty straight scratch build. The little engine facility down there, that's another one of Ben Merritt's water tanks, and then the scratch built sand house and coaling dock. LMS lumber and building supplies, that's named after my father. That is another board by board, completely interior built building. It's based on an E.L. Moore article. I just absolutely love E.L. Moore. And it's from the April 1973 model railroader, which was the first model railroader that I ever bought. And it also happens to be the first structure that I ever got a merit award for. So fortunately, don't have any photos of the return journey. Kind of wondered about that. The egg salad sandwich wasn't sitting well, and I spent the majority of the trip in the privy. Maybe I'll go for a PB&J next time, a safer bet. Fortunately for our rail fan, Combine 15 had 2, just hole down at the track privies, one for passengers and one for the postal workers. So I guess he was as good off as he could be. But fortunately, it looked like he was feeling better and was able to get some postcards. And there's a couple of postcards. The one on the left is this prototype postcard. It's colorized. We know it's colorized because the ET never had a red passenger car in his life. They were all green. And then my daughter changed that photograph a little bit to make it look a little bit more like it was colorized. And that's a picture, of course, from the Vita division. And then the bottom there, that postmark, that is an exact, I had a stamp made. It's exact replica of the postmark that was used in Combine 15 during the 1920s. So if you ever come and visit and run a train on the Vita division, I'll be glad to let you get a postmark postcard. So just come and visit. Love to see you. 2025 will be the 100th anniversary of the Vita division since I modeled 1925, and also in conjunction with the narrow gauge convention. Becky is helping me develop a coloring book for children of all ages. So there'll be something else to look forward to in a couple of years. The contributors, that's my beautiful daughter, Becky, 2 stages of her life. The upper one is when she is helping me build the platform of the sawmill, and the lower one is when she's channeling her best Hermione Granger as she levitates the sawmill out so I can work on it. I originally told her she wasn't getting paid, but then we found this check, and I mean, the date on this check in real life was September 5th, 1925, and she put her name on it, so she received exactly $171.52 for her work. And then my lovely wife, Sandy, who spent a good chunk of her career being a 3rd grade teacher and has 3rd grade teacher handwriting, she's Sandy Wordsmith, and she provided the words for it. Now, real quick, I want to just a real quick look at railroad in real life. And so this is just a look at how we operate the Vita division. So there's a couple of my operators. I kind of live in the middle of nowhere. So for years, most of my operating crew were not model railroaders. I was lucky just to have 1 or 2 other railroaders. And most of them were just friends of mine that I could coerce into coming over and trying to help me bring the Vita division to life. And some of them became very good operators over the years. None of them became model railroaders. And again, there's another look at the Vita division railroad. Again, just a simple point-to-point railroad. Johnson City, Tennessee. I took that picture down in the bottom just to kind of help me draw the map, but it's kind of cool. It looks like a Google Maps. So I didn't know they had colorized Google Maps in 1925, but I guess they do now. And then there you can see the control panels. I use Switchmaster switch machines with, and then I originally had block control. Now I've gone to DCC. And so everything is just a number 1. I've kept all the blocks though, because it helps with maintenance. And there's some pictures. And there's Hampton. It's just a simple passing siding, a couple of switches, and some pictures. Doe River Gorge, 37 feet through the gorge. I wanted to make sure that I really felt like I was going somewhere. And a couple more pictures of the gorge. Cranberry. A few more pictures. Cranberry. Linville, again, the time saver switching puzzle. We don't ever use it as a puzzle. And a few more pictures. Shoals Mills. And a few more pictures. Boone. You'll notice there, that's the Y where we turn trains at Boone. Also, you can see by using the spur track at Shoals Mills, I do have a reverse loop. So I could run the railroad as a loop to loop, although I don't. We could. A few more pictures. And then there's the dispatcher's timesheet that a dispatcher uses, again, just with time across and, a little schematic of the railroad, real standard. Short Rail McKenzie reveals the infamous McKenzie maneuver. The very first time, I love him, he went and scoped out the window and then went out, and you can see what he did with those 2 boxcars. He put them there so he blocked the view of the dispatcher. So all excited about having the view of the dispatcher the entire time. The only time he moved those cars when he had to. So the dispatcher couldn't see anything. So Short Rail could get away with his nefarious deeds. Some train orders. Again, the one on the left is prototype. The other 3 are from the Vita division. I used car cards at first and for years, and I was good success with them. I've now been transitioning into switch lists, which I find I work a lot better, particularly with new people. And again, I've talked about that already. There's the Freight Conductor's Train book. Again, just an exact copy of the real one. And the timetables. I use Digitrax. Everything's wireless. UT4Ds. I still run several of those. We've started adding the UT6s, and we're getting used to them. I think that they're working well. And again, that's the communications hardware. My goals for the VITA division is to take on a life of its own with its own history and traditions. In short, a real railroad to miniature. People have asked me why I call it the VITA division. I live in this little unincorporated town called VITA, which is why I did it. But then the other day I got to thinking vida in Latin and Spanish means life. And in Greek and in Hebrew and in Gaelic, it means much love. So the VITA division, it is a real railroad and that is much loved. So I thought that was kind of a nice little touch. And then for something completely different, I don't know if he's on tonight or not, but how often is a man lucky enough to have Statler and Waldorf from the from Muppets visit the VITA division twice? I mean, come on. So, as always, this train is bound for glory. The brakeman has resigned. I want to thank you for attending my clinic. I hope I kept it pretty close to the time limit. Any questions or anything, I'd love to answer them. And if you're ever in South Central Missouri, I'd love to have you visit. We'll get you a cheer wine and a homemade beer. So that's it.
Hey, thank you very much, Dean. That was such an imaginative presentation. I really love it. Let me go through some of the comments that came through on the chat box. Bill Hobbs says, I remember gas stations of similar cottage style in North Carolina when I was in school there for many decades ago. Looks like Gandalf.
Well, you know, he's never told me who he is, but I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan. So
there you go. Dan Stenger says the bridges were bought used and were standard gauge bridges.
That's right. I didn't have a chance to mention that because I was trying to keep within time. That's true.
Yeah. So many great details by John Shearer. Great job, Dean. Larry Mack says, Dean, very nice layout and interesting presentation. Jake Sweeney, the structures are very convincing. Did you use shots only or did you have some plans? I mean, did you use photos only, I should say? Oh,
well, I used anything I could find. Usually it was just photos. Now the like the sand house, that still existed in the late 80s. So I have photographs of it. We also were able to find aerial shots of it. And Johnny Graybeal found, you know, the paperwork from when it was built. So I had any spec I could possibly need for that. Most of the buildings, and there's obviously some selective compression involved. The sawmill is only half as long as it was in real life. It was a double sawmill. Yeah. The depot at Johnson City is 2/3 real size because it just looked too big. So yeah, I used whatever I could find, but usually it was just photographs.
Okay. Lee Bishop says, outstanding detail, Dean. I've seen photos of your layout many times, but you've shown some things that are new to me. This is an excellent representation of the ET&NC in its heyday. Bill Lund says, I can't wait to see this layout. Alan Burkhoff, to everyone, I'm really enjoying this layout tour. The modeling is outstanding and the presentation is very informative and entertaining. Thank you, Dean. R. Kerr said, really enjoy your imaginative presentation and photos of your detailed modeling. Thank you for sharing. Steve Hollenbach, great job, Dean. Anyway, thank you very much, Dean. It was wonderful, and I really enjoyed your presentation as always.
Well, you're welcome. I love doing it. I doing this the first time. Well, you were there, Pete. Yep. The first time I gave this was in Hickory, and I told people, I said, this is gonna be hokey. I ain't gonna lie. But I said, if everybody hates it, I'm not gonna care because I had so much fun putting this together with my daughter. That, you know, that was all the gratification I needed. But it's been pretty well received. And it was a lot of fun. I just have a lot of fun with it.
Great. Thanks, Dean. And over to you, Russ.